North Korea has been flexing its military muscles, which is creating some new threats to the Western world. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Kim Jong-un says he has a new type of missile which should serve as a warning to the United States. Now, weren't we discussing not too long ago denuclearizing North Korea?
Yes, this doesn't sound like a partner in negotiations by any means. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because you have Kim Jong-un, uh, who is a very mysterious character. This is what's been said about him. There's documentaries on his personality, which people even around him don't seem to understand. And on the one hand, very eager to negotiate with the United States, sit down with Donald Trump, have that photo op, have that handshake. And then when Donald Trump walks away, there's all these warnings and, as you said, flexing of the muscles. And, which one is the real Kim Jong-un and which one is the real representation of the situation with North Korea? Where do we stand? And how can we move forward with this? I mean, if you look, we have this situation in a lot of our foreign policy issues with China, with Iran, and North Korea. So hopefully we'll see some resolution on at least one, if not more, of these partners in negotiation, so to speak.
The stock markets have been in a little bit of turmoil recently with China devaluing its currency. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump is dismissing trade war fears and has slapped another, $4.4 billion duty on cabinet imports.
This is the most random headline about cabinet imports because we're actually redoing our kitchen and we chose not to go with a vendor that imports his cabinets from China. It couldn't have been more perfect. So when I saw that headline, I was very happy about choosing a different route. But that being said, many sectors of the economy here in the United States, all over the world, I'm sure, because of the imports that are coming through from China to the United States, and then they're dispersed in different ways, whether it's retail, wholesale, etc., and they're all being affected. And we just keep hearing from the White House that it's going to get worse before it gets better. But the tariffs keep going up, which most people are not a fan of. But Donald Trump believes that this is the proverbial slap on the wrist that needs to be served to the Chinese government in order for them to come around. And what does that mean for them to come around? For them to play by at least somewhat fair rules that Donald Trump seems fair, which is, not copying our intellectual property and not going back on their word and not going after cyber attacks and things of that nature. You think that's pretty fair, but China, I think, has a different plan in mind. We'll see.
How about Huawei? Is that a bit of an issue as well with the 5G network?
Absolutely. There have been many warnings served to Huawei, and well, the whole 5G phenomenon is something that most people are very excited to know more about, to hear more about, and Huawei being on the front lines of all of that. Donald Trump is cracking down. And when he means cracking down, he means cracking down. There's not going to be any exceptions made to that.
Tensions are rising as the U.S. sent an aircraft carrier through the disputed South China Sea amid tensions with Beijing. Lisa, China says it will not stand idly by if the U.S. puts missiles in the Asia-Pacific region.
Right, more exchange of threats from both sides, as we're seeing here. Besides for the tariffs and the tit for tat on the diplomatic front, we're seeing a tit for tat on the physical front, on the military side, where Donald Trump is beefing up our military presence. This is a show of leadership, regardless of whether you agree or not with how Donald Trump's handling China. Leadership in the sense that we show up when we make a threat or when we stand up to an adversary. We show up, and that's exactly what's going on here. And we have that military presence near China for them to know they can't go on in business as usual, to bother their neighbors, to reign that part of the world the way that they have. They will have to play by international rules, and I think this is a way to both on the tariff front and on the military front attempt to curb the Chinese government.
Lisa, let's talk about the horrific mass shootings which took place, sadly, in the United States recently. El Paso, Texas, 20 people dead, another 9 people in Dayton, Ohio. Is this a forum or a conduit for people to attack Donald Trump right now and his administration?
Absolutely, and that's what's been going on from the Democrat candidates to many others and anti-gun organizations. Um, Look, it's horrific. No, there's no two ways about it. It's horrific. We are mourning with the individuals, their families, those who are injured, those who had to witness this. There was a young 2-month-old baby whose two parents were protecting the baby, and the parents did not survive. And when you look at these stories, of course, these communities are going to be scarred for life. And when you look at the nonsense, the nonsensical mentalities that cause this type of attack, this is garbage, and it can't be put on one president, one speech, one book, one club, or anything like that as it's being done. This is simplifying a much larger issue. And look, we had these types of attacks under President Obama. We have them under President Trump. We'll have them under the next president, unfortunately. And until we look at it as, in a wholesale fashion, and see what kinds of, mindsets or violent upbringings or mental health issues. I mean, there's a whole long list. It can't be pinned on one president, one individual, one stance. It's unfortunate that this is what's going on. It looks awful to the international world. You have countries like Japan and Mexico and Venezuela and a whole list of others warning their citizens not to travel to the United States. And it's one thing if a country like Japan, that's fairly safe, warns its citizens. It's another when countries like Mexico and Venezuela, where it's sometimes in parts unsafe to just walk the streets, for them to warn. And it looks awful. It looks awful. And the media needs to take responsibility of making these false and gross generalizations across the board about shootings, mass shootings in the United States. The details and the reality of the situation are real enough. They're gross enough. They don't need to be exaggerated. There doesn't need to be a blame game that goes on. And the sooner we come around to getting off of this partisan horse, the sooner we can find some sort of solution or some sort of recourse for victims of these crimes.
Yeah, finding solutions instead of finger pointing is what it should be all about, definitely. The Taliban in Afghanistan denounced a presidential vote next month as a sham and threatened to attack election rallies as militants and the United States reported progress on a deal to end America's longest war.
Yeah, this is exactly what we want to hear from the people we entrusted to take over when we pull out of Afghanistan, right? More of the same. The Taliban cannot be trusted. They are a terror organization, and they will always be a terror organization. Now, for the United States to be negotiating or at least believing that this is the group that can be entrusted with the future of Afghanistan, as has been done, the U.S. will be pulling out. This was the news last week that the U.S. will be pulling out more troops by next year in a deal that they struck with the Taliban. Who strikes a deal with the Taliban? This is very, very, it's a precarious situation. It always has been in Afghanistan. Now, if you ask me what is the solution for the future of Afghanistan, that is a very difficult question to answer. While we're in bed with the Taliban, is there another way to move forward, a nation building for that country? Probably not. It doesn't leave them many options, and it leaves them very vulnerable to be taken over by these insurgencies. And that's exactly what happens if you look at Iraq, you look at Syria, you look at Afghanistan. When there is this political vulnerability, those are the groups that come in, swoop right in, and are able to take over and have influence. So when you have, at least perhaps this is the mentality or the thought behind this negotiation, is that when you have a group like the Taliban that at least is recognized by the United States, or at least will come to the table with the United States, then at least that's the group to strike a deal with. It's unfortunate, and mostly, Hal, you and I have spoken about this, it's the people of Afghanistan who are the victims of all of this back and forth, and they have not had a pretty past, they haven't had a pretty present, and the future looks dim as well.
The United States has heaped more sanctions on Venezuela. Now, the Trump administration says it is ready to target other countries for supporting Maduro. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it looks like we're not getting any headway on getting Maduro out of office in Venezuela. With more sanctions and more sanctions, that country couldn't be more economically crippled at this point. But now the United States would like to go after the countries who are pulling the puppet strings and allowing Maduro to stay in power. And that's a long list of our current adversaries or those who are competing with us as well. So, do we want to go up against Russia and North Korea and Iran to discuss what the future of Venezuela will be? Probably not. We have bigger fish to fry. Can we go after countries like Cuba? Yes, we can. And I think these threats that are made against those that are propping up the Maduro regime at least serve as a warning to to smaller countries, and secondly, show the direction that the United States is taking. Obviously, the United States was a firm believer in toppling Maduro, in removing him from office, and having someone like a Guaido. If you remember him, he was the opposition leader who hasn't been in headlines recently. He's moved off to the side. He's had people around him that are very important, his right hand, his left hand, arrested, a lot of violence and threats made towards him and his family. So he's moved off to the side. But we know where the United States stands, and hopefully for a better future for the Venezuelan people.
Now let's stay with sanctions for just a moment here, Lisa. They appear to be taking a toll on Iran. Iran's president is warning that a war with Tehran would be the mother of all wars.
Yeah, more threats. Uh, you know, escalations keep occurring and the rhetoric keeps getting stronger. But what will be the future of negotiations between Iran and the United States? As you said, the United States is applying this pressure campaign, and the pressure campaign involves heavy duty sanctions that are quite targeted against both the sectors that matter to the regime, like weapons, like copper, like steel, like oil, like banking, and individuals who are integral to the regime, like their foreign minister, Zarif, and other members of the Revolutionary Guard. These are the individuals who are quite integral day in and day out to the Iranian regime, and we're hoping that this pressure campaign will put enough of a burden and enough pressure on the Iranians, the Iranian government, so that they will back down from their threats and their chest thumping. But that hasn't happened. We do know that the sanctions are working. We do know that they have been weakened. We know that they are really cornered. But what do they do when they're cornered? They start kicking even harder. And that means another oil tanker was seized this week. That means more exchange of very harsh rhetoric towards the United States. Unfortunately, this is going to probably also get worse before it gets any better, because the Iranians don't look like they're backing down anytime soon.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is threatening to develop nuclear missiles. If the United States does, could we see another Cold War developing here?
Well, yes, perhaps, but I don't think either country is in a position to want to spread itself so thin to go up against the other. But that being said, we are not in any nuclear treaty right now with the Russians. If you recall, Donald Trump withdrew from that treaty not too long ago, and we did not enter into a new one. So right now, the Russians can exchange these very harsh threats with the United States and say, well, if you withdrew from the treaty and you're going to go against the tenets of the treaty, well, we can do the same. And that's fair enough. It's a very delicate dance that the White House is doing currently with the Russians. We're just pretty much putting them off to the side with regards to any foreign policy, ignoring many of their actions that are going against the policies of the White House, but at the same time hoping that they are enough of a interest-aligned partner, definitely not an ally, in certain situations, that they would respect at least the United States. We go up against each other in many cases as well, like in Syria, for example. But I think the Russians have enough on their plate, as does Donald Trump, to at least give each other this space and move forward. I think Donald Trump has always used treaties and negotiations as leverage, and I think he's holding this leverage over the Russians as well for now.
Concern from Kashmir is mounting as India is blocking phone and internet service. Lisa, that's the story here from the Washington Post. And we know the history between Pakistan and India, and it's not a good history.
No, and this is such a big story, and it's not being covered as it should. Maybe perhaps people don't understand the history, as you said, between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. What is Kashmir? What is it? Kashmir is this small Himalayan island. It's very small. Very. It would appear to be an insignificant piece of real estate to most, but India and Pakistan seem to be fighting over it for many, many, many years now. The lines were drawn. Pakistan wasn't happy with the advantage that India had in Kashmir, and they sat down again and they drew new lines. And in the new lines, India maintained a majority of that Kashmir and drew up a sort of solution that would make both sides somewhat happy, where Kashmir would be partially autonomous and partially not. They'd be partially under India and partially not. And now, with what they perceive as somewhat of an uprising, and again, I'll say this has been beneath the surface for a long time now. India has felt that there's been these insurgencies that want to basically get the Indian influence off of them and to be fully autonomous. And when they feel that these protests have gotten worse and these insurgencies have gotten stronger and building more momentum, India is now cracking down. And that's what we're seeing since the beginning of the month for about a week now. Now, the Kashmiris want full autonomy. The Pakistanis don't want the Indians to have more power. The Indians want full power because they're losing power. And that's where we have it now. India has pulled a lot of their basically their perks or their advantages, whatever control was in their hands, including internet or phone lines. So they're basically punishing them so that they play along. And that's where we have it up to now. But you have a lot of other foreign players getting involved. You have China putting in their 2 cents, Pakistan, of course, putting in their 2 cents, and of course, India trying to really toe the line here and put this pressure on Kashmir to straighten out.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.